Okay.
Today is February 7th, 2021, and we are here with Mr. Alvin G for the Houston Asian American Archive Oral History Project. Welcome back, Mr. G, and thank you so much for taking your time today. How have you been since our last interview?
Just fine, thanks.
Great, good to hear that. So to start off, would you mind telling us where and when you were born?
I was born here in Houston, Texas on August 26, 1954.
How would you describe the household you grew up in?
It was a typical household. My parents were in the grocery store business here in Houston, and a lot of the people, the immigrants that came from China to Houston were uh, mainly grocery store owners or the laundry business or the restaurant business.
I see.
So my mother and father had a small corner grocery store,
Mhm.
and uh, my father came here with my grandfather uh, when my dad was 16 years old. And he and my dad had a store, and and back then, um, the people that would migrate to America, the plan was to make money and send it back home to China.
Mhm.
And so that's what my dad and grandfather wanted to do. And then my dad, um, after a few years, my dad wanted to go back home, and he met my mom, and there was a matchmaker that matched them up,
Mhm.
and my dad really loved my mom, and my mom, on the other hand, kind of didn't really like my dad at the time, and then uh, but they got to know each other and they got married, and then they migrated here to America.
Mhm. Yeah, very interesting story.
Yes.
So, like, do you have any siblings?
I'm sorry.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have two older sisters, and an older brother and a younger brother. So it's a big family. They're a family of five,
Mhm.
five children, and mom and dad.
Okay. So are you the youngest one or
I'm next to the youngest.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what are some values that your parents emphasize during your upbringing?
My mom and dad are, my dad's deceased. My mom's still living. She's 93 years old. And they're both believers. They're both Christians. And they believed in being a good Christian person. And it's so they're, they had very strong beliefs about that. And they shared those beliefs with us.
Mm,
So at a young age, my siblings would go to church, and my mom and dad, having a grocery store business, they pretty much opened 7 days a week. So they maintained that, and so they taught us ethics and values, and to be a good citizen.
mhm. So do you feel that kind of hard work that your parents have been practiced for a long time have also influenced you?
Yes,
Mhm.
my parents had a very strong worth work ethic, and they believed in working hard and being friends with the customers, and they had very faithful customers that would come in, and it was very it was a real good. uh, I can sense that, uh, in my dad's golden years, when I asked him when he was happiest, he shared with me that he was happiest when the grocery store was thriving. Uh, like I shared with you, it's a little mom and pop grocery store with a meat market in the back,
Mhm.
and mom would check out, and dad would run the meat market, and he would cut the meat and the chickens and everything, and it was just that's when he was happiest.
Yeah. Um, are there languages that you speak at home, like besides English?
Uh, my mom and dad came from a little village, and we would speak Toisan, which is a kind of a village dialect from Cantonese.
Mm, okay, cool. And how would you describe the neighborhood you grew up in? Like, was it about,
Uh,
yeah, the neighborhood? Sorry.
of course, the neighborhood was the east side, and it was called Sunnyside, and it was a predominantly black neighborhood, and that was where we had a grocery store, and then at the back of the grocery store were the living quarters. So we didn't have live in a house per se. Uh, well, we lived in a house for a short time, but then a lot of the times, we lived in the back of the grocery store, and that was kind of like the general setup for a lot of the small businesses and the small Chinese grocery stores. That's how they pretty much survived.
Hmm. Were the customers of your parents' grocery store mostly Black people also, or Chinese people as well?
Uh, Predominantly black,
Okay,
right?
interesting. And yeah, and since you mentioned that your father moved back to China and get married with your mom, and then do you know why they decided to move back to the States?
Um, at the time, uh, it was a very dangerous time in China because uh, the Japanese were invading China at the time. So it was a very dangerous time to be living in China. So a lot of Chinese people uh, migrated back here to America,
Mhm.
and that's exactly what what my mom and dad did. Um, my mom has family, in the Chicago, Washington area, and then my dad has family in the Los Angeles area.
Mm, I see. So, do you know like what kind of challenges they were facing when they moving back to the States at that time?
Well, when my dad was 16 years old, when he first moved here,
Mhm.
he did not, he and my grandfather did not speak English. And so my dad, he was 16 years old, and he enrolled in elementary school. So he was a lot older than his than his classmates, but he really wanted to learn the English language. So, uh, and Dad is was a very friendly man. Made friends very easily, and was a very likable person.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Sure.
So, in terms of your childhood memories, would you mind sharing one of your favorite childhood memories that you still?
Um, we did not get a chance to go on a lot of vacations, um, but uh, we would make day trips to Galveston
Mhm.
and go crabbing. And what crabbing is, it's hard, the shelled crabs.
Mhm.
And we would go on the jetties and uh, and then tie meat onto a string and throw it in the water and very slowly bring it back up and then catch the crabs. And that was always a very not fun thing to do.
Interesting.
And yeah,
Okay. So what college did you attend?
I attended the University of Houston,
Mhm.
and I have a degree in radio and television in communications, and I graduated back in 1977.
Mm. Or was communication the subject that you were interested in, like, and when at the beginning of your attending college, or did you know like what you want to study before you went to college?
Um, my parents were very old school, and they basically said, um, Alvin, if you want to go to a college, then you go to a college or university here in Houston. We don't want you traveling
Mm.
out of state, and we prefer that you. So, um, so I attended the University of Houston uh, after I graduated from high school. Um, I, I liked the aspect of communications. When I was in high school, I was the yearbook editor. So I learned, I had some friends and they taught me how to develop film and how to take pictures and how to make photographs in a dark room, in a makeshift dark room. And I was just I really enjoyed taking photographs. And, so I learned everything I possibly could. And then, and then and then when I graduated from high school, um, I continued working at the University of Houston student publications and continued working on the yearbook there at the University of Houston. And there I had the opportunity to photograph student life, group photographs, deans of colleges. I actually photographed the president of the university, Dr. Philip Hoffman, um, and that was quite an honor to do. And he was very polite and very friendly. Um, and here's this 20-year-old student photographing Dr. Philip Hoffman, and I was just kind of perspiring and really nervous, and set the lights up and photographed him. And the photograph turned out very nice. But it was something that I really, really enjoyed taking photographs. Unfortunately, the University of Houston did not offer a photography degree. There were photography classes taught on campus, one in the art, a color uh, class in the College of Architecture. There was a journalism class, photographic class, and in the fine arts, they had some photography classes there. So I took every photography class I could, and then worked on the yearbook. And I think I was paid $40 a month uh, to be on the yearbook staff, and then $2 an 8x10 photograph, which back then was really a lot of money. So that kind of gave me spending money to buy more cameras, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to take photographs, a wonderful opportunity to meet uh, the faculty
Mhm.
and friends. So during class, I always had my camera with me. So I would be photographing different things and events specifically for the yearbook. I would make contact proof sheets, and this would be all of the photographs that I took, and I would give them to the photographer. The editors of the yearbook, they would choose the photos that they would like. We would print them, and then at the end of the month, we would get our big check for maybe $80 or $90, which was, like I shared with you, a lot of money back then.
Yeah, definitely. So besides the photography classes you took and in University of Houston, did you also receive other kind of professional training in photography?
Um, I my when I was growing up, my next door neighbor, Arthur Manning, was a professional photographer. And in the summer times, I would work at his studio, uh, cleaning the studio, doing darkroom work, just miscellaneous things. And I just really, at that time, knew that this is the profession that I would really like to do. It's work, but it's almost like a hobby of sorts. And so I I was a member. I participated in the Professional Photographers Guild of Houston. They would have monthly meetings and monthly speakers, and then I would glean a lot of information there. I became a member of the Professional Photographers of America, and there they would have uh, annual conventions, and I would try to make those conventions either fly or drive there. And so that's how I learned a lot, by going to conventions. And it's not like today where you can just, if you want to learn something, you just go to YouTube, or you just Google something and there's just lots of information. Back then it was harder to learn. Um, and so it was just a lot of training. It's just taking classes when you could.
Yeah, definitely. So I was wondering, like, when did you start get interested in photography? Like, did you start from like your work in your neighbor's studio, or how has that started?
um, well, when it was in high school, when I really enjoyed taking photographs. And then my neighbor, Arthur Manning, the professional photographer, said, when you graduate from college, if you want to come work here, you're more than welcome to. So
Mhm.
when I have a degree in radio and television, and I interned at Channel 20 in my senior year. And so I had an internship there. I ran a camera, a studio camera there, learned a lot about studio camera work. And then in my senior year at the University of Houston, every week we would meet at Channel 39. There was a program called Campus Workshop. And then every week we would take turns being the director, the sound engineer, the cameraman, the lighting engineer. Uh, and we just, so at the end of the semester, we we actually had a program that we put together. And uh, when it was my turn to be the director, and my turn to have a theme program, a 30-minute program, it was the University of Houston's sesquicentennial. And there uh, we interviewed Dr. Philip Hoffman. Since I knew him from photographing him, he came to the studio. We interviewed him, and I did a lot of research on the University of Houston. Uh, we took the nice thing about the University of Houston campus is they have all the yearbooks from many, many, many years ago. So we would photograph and kind of put a historical spin on this program, where we would break up the decades. And so we would start in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and then we took photographs of the University of Houston's activities in each of those decades. And that was a lot of fun. And it was just a very and what was really, really exciting is when my program came out, um, the Chronicle TV guide, when you used to get the Chronicle, there used to be a TV guide in the Sunday paper. Well, it listed my program, uh, and it was something like sometimes in these TV guides, they would say, this is something that you should watch. This is something you should watch. And it was highlighted. And so it was really exciting to know that my program was selected to be this week's favorite show to watch. Yeah. So I had a lot of training at a TV station. And so when I graduated, um, jobs are real hard to find at a TV station because at the time there were very limited opportunities. I really had the desire to want to be a TV producer. And what a TV producer does is he or she conceptualizes the program and then pitches the program to the director and says, I think that this would be a wonderful thing to talk about. And then the producer finds the talent, finds the subject matter, finds everything and puts it all together. And that's what I like to do. I like that a whole lot more than directing. Directing is very stressful. You have to keep an eye on several cameras and then cut from each camera to the best shot. And it's amazing when you're watching a show how good directors just effortlessly do that. And it's a great talent. And unfortunately, at the time, there were just very few TV stations. And so I opted to work for my next door neighbor at his photography studio. I worked there, and then I worked there for a short period of time. And then I worked for a commercial studio just to learn more about the different aspects of photography. The studio that I worked for mainly specialized in people and not a whole lot of commercial photography. So I went to work for a commercial photography studio where they would make inanimate objects like pipes and rock bits attractive. And then as soon as you photograph them, they would crate them and send them off to another country. And so it was really exciting to learn uh, commercial photography that way, just pretty much hands-on.
Yes, I believe those are definitely very meaningful experience for you. So how did
Yes.
you decide to start your own business?
Um, I worked, uh, so I worked for a commercial studio, and it was a partnership, and these two gentlemen allowed me to kind of start my own business because there was not a conflict of interest. I really liked photojournalism, um, and so the next best thing with photojournalism would be wedding photography because it's kind of capturing the moment, capturing a day, capturing a story between two people. So I started off doing wedding photography, and then the commercial photography studio, they dissolved their partnership, and so one had asked me to work for him, and the other person said, let's share a studio. And I said, hey, that sounds like a great idea. So we shared a studio, and and it and then everything just kind of evolved. So this year is my 40th year in photography.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
So were there any challenges you faced when you or some things that you didn't expect when you first started your own business?
Yes, there's a lot of things that are very challenging. Um, and this was, in the early 80s. And, at that time, there were, you know, it wasn't the best atmosphere to open up a photography studio, but I did, and and learned a lot of things along the way. uh, and and yes, there are a lot of challenges. I think one aspect that was very difficult for me was at the time I was a very shy person,
Mhm.
and when you're a shy person wanting to do wedding photography, it's quite a challenge because you have to be a psychologist, a motivator, a director, all these different people in very stressful times. And um, I was being Chinese, being Asian is, you know, I guess we learn to be very humble, be very quiet, just do what you're told to do. So it was kind of a hard thing to kind of break out of. Um, I had a real difficulty with that, and I talked to my brother-in-law about this, and he gave me some really good advice. He says, Alvin, take this as a challenge to yourself that whatever you do, you are going to be in a Caucasian society. So being Chinese, you're going to look different. So because you're going to look different, you're going to have that one special thing that other photographers don't have, you know, and so you do the best you can, and then you'll be known as that. Oh, that's the Chinese photographer, and for a long time, um, I but I always hope that people would like me because of the work that I do, and not because I'm Asian.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I was also wondering, like, since you mentioned that photography was not a very conventional job at that time, so I was wondering, did you like, what were your parents' reactions when they first hear that you're going to be a photographer and even started your own business?
My parents were extremely uh, supportive of my work. Um, I would kind of turn the living room into a camera room, into a studio. You know what? Before I had uh, um, a studio space to work out of. You know, I would have a background, and then I would invite people over to be photographed. And so my parents were very supportive. You know, people in my age group, you know, parents would like them to be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant. Um, but my parents, the one advice that my dad gave me, he said, Alvin, you can do anything you want. The important thing is don't go in the grocery business and invest in buying your own building.
Mm.
And so I said, okay, Dad, I appreciate the advice. And so I did not go into the grocery business. And, you know, back in 2000, uh, I did purchase a building.
Oh,
So, so, you know, everything kind of came around at the right time.
yeah, that's nice to hear. So,
Yeah.
what would you say the differences are between managing your own business versus working as a freelancer or working for other people?
Wow, that's really a good question, Kelly. When you know, I don't think there's anything wrong. In fact, if someone were to ask me, um, Alvin, should I go to school and study photography, or should I go out, start my own business, or should I work for somebody? I would always encourage someone to work for someone else. And when you work for someone else, you don't really you look at that person's successes and you learn from their successes, but more importantly, you learn from their failures. Um, when I worked for the commercial photography studio, uh, one day the photographer that I worked for, he accidentally plugged the flash into the wrong spot on the camera, and none of the pictures turned out. And I really appreciated the way he handled this because he didn't want to just lie to the customer. He called the customer and said, I just want you to know, I'm sorry, but none of the pictures turned out. I plugged the cord into the camera, and it was the wrong place to plug it in. And so I learned so much from someone's failure than someone's success. And so whenever I make a mistake, and we are all going to make mistakes, um, the quicker you can apologize, fess up, and then try to redo something, that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, certainly. How did you grow your business?
I it business nowadays, you could use social media. You buy Facebook time and different things. Back when I started, there was the Yellow Pages, and then there were very expensive newspaper and magazine ads. So the way I learned is just how to market myself is through word of mouth. I wanted to just do the best I can every single time, and then hope that they would share their, um, like a Google review, that they would share their positive experiences with us, with their friends. And so that's how we just kind of started. I, since my business was wedding photography for 25 years, I made sure that reception venues knew me. I wanted to make sure that wedding coordinators knew me. I would give complimentary photographs to the people that made the cakes, the people that made the flowers, the wedding venues. I would try to make sure I got to know the pastors and the rabbis and the priests and judges that would marry people. So, and then if there was a band that was playing at the reception, I would give them a photograph. And and so when someone would get engaged and then they would go to these different venues, they would hear my name repeated more than once. And that was a very good way to, uh, a good investment to give them photographs, because when they would want to show what they do, it would be a photograph that we took and our logo would be on the bottom of the photograph.
Mm, yeah, definitely. So, would you say, have you found a niche in the photography business?
Um, yes, I did wedding photography for 25 years, and then we stopped doing wedding photography a few years back. And so I have a niche, and that's photographing large family groups. We have a large studio. Uh, we have techniques how we are able to photograph large groups, how to light them, and we sit down and chat with the client, find out exactly what their needs are. We get names of everybody. I sketch out the photograph before I actually take the photograph, so that I know exactly where mom and dad are going to be, where siblings and spouses are going to be. So when you look at a large family group that we do, you'll see that the subfamilies are all together. It's not like there's going to be one little child that doesn't belong, that's on the far side, and then their family is on the other side. We try to create a very cohesive, good-looking group with everybody smiling, everybody looking into the camera with their eyes open. And it's I am very happy that we can do that. And when I was thinking about what to do, once I finished the wedding photography business, I wanted to do something that was challenging. I wanted to do something that you can't do by yourself, because usually, when you're photographing a family, when I was growing up, when I had my small family, I was the photographer. So we always had pictures of my wife, my daughter, my son, and where's dad? He's taking the photograph. So um, it's nice that I can, let me create the photograph for you, and that's what we've been doing for the last several years.
Yeah, sure. How important teamwork is for your photography business?
Teamwork is extremely important. You're only as good as your weakest link. Um, I personally know my the Federal Express driver's name. The So that when he comes in, we'll say, "Hi, Eric. How are you doing? Would you like a Coke?" Um, because each
So, sorry.
Hi, are we still there? Okay. That was someone calling. So you're only as good as your weakest link. I have a very small staff, and I outsource everything. So that's basically how we take the photographs, and then we outsource the retouching, uh, the printing, and then we do the framing. And so there's different aspects of the business. And it's teamwork is very, very important in work. Google reviews are very, very important in your work. So you really want everybody to uh, that you want every aspect of the business. A business is very delicate. You have to balance great work with great business practices, uh, because I know a lot of great photographers that are not very good business people, and then I know some really good business people, and they're just average photographers, but they have a very thriving business. So it's important to kind of balance those two things.
How did you maintain that balance?
Maintaining it is not easy, because it's human nature to get lackadaisical, and so you really have to surround yourself with really good people, and you need to stay motivated. And I still enjoy taking photographs a lot. It's like it's not work. I know that I'm kind of thinking about retirement, but only thinking about it, because I would like to continue to work. As long as people like what I do, I'd like to continue to do what I love to do, and that is photographing people, making them look their best, making them feel good, making them enjoy, helping them enjoy the experience. Everybody's a little self-conscious. So sometimes when I'm taking photographs and I see that they're very self-conscious, I'll just ask them, I'll say, uh, tell me about the last time you were photographed, and what did you like about the photograph, and what did you not like about the photograph? And people will just open up, and they'll just say, well, as a child, I fell down and my front tooth is slightly yellower than the other teeth. And I'm just real self-conscious about that. I said, don't worry about that. I'll fix that. Well, I have this blemish right here, and I'll just say, don't worry about that. I'll fix that. So we fix little things that so you can just see on their faces. They go, "Oh, that's great. That's wonderful." And so that's my job, is to make people look their best.
That's very inspiring to hear.
Yeah.
So, if the people you photographed reflect the changes in Houston's demographics since you started your photography business in 1978, how would you describe the changes?
Well, um, there are a lot more interracial families, where there's decidedly a lighter complexion person and a darker complexion person. And you need to make sure that the group is very cohesive. So you want to, um, so just physics, just when you light a family, uh, a darker person should be a little bit closer to the light. Then in that way, they'll get more light, and the lighter person should be further away from the light, and then they'll get less light. So it has a tendency to kind of equal things out. A light person doesn't want to be completely white in a photograph, and a Black person doesn't want to be dark in a photograph. So you want to make sure that there's a pleasing balance in the photograph. And then we always have a consultation with the client. It's a design consultation. So we ask them to wear more medium to darker clothes, because you always want the face to be the lightest part in the photograph. And these are all, and then we pick the backgrounds that will work best. And then there's some things that we can do after the photograph, and that's the post-processing, that we can effectively lighten and darken complexions too. And so I guess, Kelly, that has kind of been a difference. The other difference is, usually when people would go to the photography studio early in my career, they would dress up. It was more, the men would wear coat and ties, the women would wear long dresses. It was very formal. Now, very seldom do we photograph families that way. It's a lot more relaxed. If the man wears a jacket, he won't wear a necktie. And that is just a very nice, sharp look. A woman, on the other hand, she can wear a nice blouse, dark slacks, and so it's kind of more of a dressy, casual look versus a dressy look. So that is, but the most important thing is they're being photographed, because historically, this is what their children and grandchildren are going to remember, the family, the family legacy.
Right. Yes. So I imagine that changes in customers' preference also happen throughout the years. Can you talk about the changes and challenges to keep up with customers' requests? How do you envision the future of photography business?
Um, our studios, we specialize in wall portraits, in wall art, and and people still do like to have wall portraits, and we find that people like to have smaller photographs, photographs in albums. So instead of just one special photograph, they have an album of the family portrait, just the children, individuals of the children, mom and dad together. So they prefer a collection, and by all means, we'll be happy to create collections as well as a single portrait on the wall. So that is something that has the evolution, evolving those ways of enjoying photographs.
Mhm. I see. Has the iPhone and ability to create instant photos impacted your business?
I would probably say yes. You know, everybody thinks they're a photographer, and and because everybody's carrying an iPhone now, or a smartphone, and they're quite good. In fact, they're excellent. But you know, anybody that has a typewriter cannot be Stephen King. They can't be a great novelist just because they own a typewriter. So, and then just because someone has a grand piano doesn't mean that they're going to be a great musician. They're going to have to practice and practice and practice. And there's an old saying that you become an expert once you do something 10,000 with 10,000 hours. I have mastered the art of taking photographs. There's so many elements in taking a photograph. There's the psychology aspect of it, getting people that don't want to smile, and lighting the face. Not everybody has a perfect symmetrical face. Caucasians have very deep set eyes. Chinese, on the other hand, we don't have deep set eyes. So Asian faces are easier to light than Caucasian faces. So what you do is you observe, and then you capture the moment, and that's basically what we do. And then it's very subjective. I can feel like I've taken a wonderful photograph of somebody, but if the client says, "I hate it, I don't like it, this doesn't look like me," we start over again, and we try again, and so that's the subjectivity of this. There's not like a level of expectation. It's kind of like a singer. They can sing a song over and over again, but very seldom are they going to hit a bad note, because they've practiced, and that's basically when you hire a professional photographer like myself. I have practiced and practiced, and and it, and one in their lifetime, they may use a professional photographer just a handful of times. When they graduate from high school, when they get married, when they have their first child, a generational family portrait. That's about it. It's not like going to a restaurant once a week. It's something that you do on a special occasion.
From taking family pictures, you must have observed differences in family interactions from the various ethnic groups, as you just mentioned. So can you share memories of some unique situations? How, from your observations, do you see the common areas where the family's values disregard the different backgrounds?
I do photograph different ethnic groups, and sometimes this doesn't happen very often. Most of the people, when I photograph them, they will they'll take direction fairly well. The only time I have a difficult time is when there's a pet, like a dog, or in the photograph, or a small child who's kind of like in their twos and threes. Sometimes they just kind of like to challenge the adult and just say, no, I'm not going to do that. So the nice thing about digital photography nowadays is that if I have a really large family group, let's just say I have 40 people in one photograph, and then I have a child that really there's a meltdown, and it's a bad meltdown. This little child didn't get a nap, and he's all sugared up because the mom gave him a lot of sugar candy. What we can do is, even though the child is melting down, I'll take the photograph anyway. And then after we've taken the photograph and the child's really we'll just take, my assistant will just grab the child, just take the child out of the photograph. Then what we'll do is after the child has calmed down and cleaned himself up, we'll just take a photograph of him individually, and then we'll drop him into the photograph, into the family photograph. And so that's very helpful that we can do that digitally. In the past, when it was film, it was almost impossible to do.
Mm, I
So,
understand.
yeah.
Mm. Do you have some favorite photographers, like who inspired you?
Oh, there's so many photographers. Um, some contemporary portrait photographers would be Annie Leibovitz. Um, uh, a lot of fashion photographers are kind of like the trend-setting photographs. Richard Avedon. Um, Arnold Newman was a very famous Life magazine photographer. In fact, I studied with him for a week at the Palm Beach School of Photography. Um, to listen to really wonderful photographers is very inspiring. Um, I always learn something from someone's uh, presentation.
Yeah, sure. And now we're going to shift gear a little bit. Then I ask you some questions about your family and your identity. So, how
Sure.
did you meet your wife?
I met my wife at church. We uh, we both sang in the choir at church, and then and then and then she was going to school at the University of Houston, and I was going to school at the University of Houston, and we met, and it was great. She we're a lot alike, but we're very different too.
Mm. When did you guys get married, or like how has that happened?
Um, I was photographing a wedding, and she was assisting me at a wedding. And after the wedding, I had an engagement ring in my pocket, and the only thing I can think about was the engagement ring in my pocket because I was going to propose to her after the wedding. And so I was just real happy and relieved that when I proposed to her, she said yes, and I didn't have to worry about the ring in my pocket anymore.
Okay. How many children do you have?
I have two children. I have a boy and a girl.
Mm. What values would you I mean, what values have you instilled in your children with their upbringing?
Uh, I too wanted them to have uh, to be believers first, to be Christians, um, and they are. And I think it's really important that that honesty and truth and virtues are very, very important in their life. And it's wonderful that they are very great, wonderful citizens in this, in where they live.
Mhm. Definitely. So, how do you identify yourself?
Um, I would identify myself as an American.
Mhm.
I am of Chinese descent, but being born and raised here in Houston, I believe that I'm a Texan,
Mhm.
and I'm a believer, and I'm a dad, I'm a grandfather, I'm a son, and and that's how I see myself.
Mhm. What is the first experience where you felt that the demarcation of being a minority different?
Um, just growing up, my dad had a grocery store, and it was in the east side of town in Sunnyside, and you look different, and a- and and I think it's always kind of in the back of your mind that you want to fit in,
Mhm.
and and it's kind of uncomfortable. But like the story that I shared with you about my brother-in-law who shared with me, you use being different to your advantage. Um, you do stick out. You are different, and and then you try to do the very best you can, because uh, because you are different.
Mhm. So how important is the Chinese heritage to your life or to your upbringing or even now or even your photography business?
Um, I think it's important. Um, I I am a my last name is G, and there is a huge G family association here in Houston,
Mhm.
and a- and so consequently, um, I think one's heritage is very important. Um, you know, there's a lot of people that do want to know their family heritage, and it's 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 good to know that. And I feel like it's important to, you know, me being a photographer, to um, to create a legacy, to create a heritage, um, no matter what nationality you are.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. How did you celebrate or embrace or even challenge your Chinese heritage?
Um, my, my mom and dad are both Chinese, and I have a Chinese name. I like Chinese food,
Mm.
um, and I think that in any nationality, especially in Chinese, Asian, that we're taught to respect our elders,
Mm.
which I definitely do uh, respect my elders, uh, and uh, and that's important.
Yeah, definitely. Do you celebrate some festivals as well?
Um, as of late, I, we don't celebrate Chinese New Year, but I remember as a child,
Mm.
uh, you know, we would go to the Chinatown, the original Chinatown that was downtown, not the one that's on Bel Air Boulevard,
Mhm.
and there would be dragon dances and fireworks uh, celebrating the Lunar New Year,
Mm.
and we would go, we would definitely do that.
I see. And this could be a bit challenging question. Have you ever had conflicts with your earlier generation or later generation due to different opinions regarding your cultural heritage?
Um, I don't think that's ever come up. Uh, I'm not going to say my parents eh, were old fashioned or liberal, or they were um, they were. I think when they instilled the values that I have, um, I've had the opportunity to maintain those values,
Mhm.
um, and with my children, they're terrific. you I think as parents, there's always a there might be a conflict or two, but for the most part, we put we've gotten along very, very well.
Mm, that's great to hear. Uh,
Good.
so how would you describe the Asian or Chinese American community in Houston?
Uh, I I think the Asian and Chinese community here in Houston, I think if I had to guess, there's probably at least 100,000 Chinese in Houston. I'm just guessing.
Mhm.
Um, I think you'll find that a lot of Asians and Chinese, they take care of their own. Very seldom will you go to a street corner and see an Asian person with a sign uh, wanting a handout.
Mm,
You just don't see it very often. Um, I think um, I think most uh, Asians want to be law-abiding citizens. They want to be uh, s- good small business people. Uh, they there's a lot more professionals, Asians, uh, a lot more, and they're very diversified in their field, in their field of education, and uh, and I'm very happy. I'm very proud of that.
mhm. Yeah, sure. And yeah, because of the nature of your business, you must have been in contact with various community activities. Which are the ones that you consider most meaningful and best reflect your idea of giving back to the community?
Um, I belong to First Baptist Church, and before COVID, um, I belonged to the baptism committee. And what the baptism committee does is on the second and fourth Sundays of every Sunday, we would there would be 3 or 4 or 5 people be baptized, and what my job would be to photograph the baptismal candidate with the pastor that's baptizing them, and then as they're being baptized, I would photograph them being baptized, submerging into the water and coming out. And then we would do this at no charge. And then we would send the photographs to the church. The church in turn would give the photographs to the candidate as a memento. And and that's just a wonderful way to uh, give back to the community, photographically speaking. Um, and then uh, and then once a quarter, our the men at First Baptist Church have something have something that's called Men Serve, and what Men Serve is that we would help the widows in the community. Uh, we would help them change light bulbs, change, cut their grass, paint a bathroom, and do things that sometimes um, the widows aren't able to do. So that that's something that we get a chance to do, and that really gives back to the community, and in a very visible way.
Mm, yeah, that's great. So my next question is, what role does your Christian faith play in your life or in your business or yeah?
Well, I don't put a sign out that I'm a Christian photographer. Or I'm a photographer that happens to be a Christian.
Mhm,
Um, I I I want to do what's right. I want to do, basically in a Christian faith, um, you basically want I remember years and years ago, there was a bracelet that was WWJD in it, and those four uh, letters was an acronym of what would Jesus do, and and as a Christian, as a believer, it basically boils down to what would Jesus do? What to be more like Christ, to live uh, in a humble fashion, to not cheat, steal. Uh, these are virtues that Jesus had and he taught, and and that's very important to me, and very important to me to pass on to my children too.
Mhm, definitely. Since you mentioned that you are part of the G's family in Houston, would you like to talk about your involvement in the G family as well?
Oh, sure. Um, the G Family Association is is an organization that we meet on an annual basis to celebrate Chinese New Year. Um, Several years ago, one of our G family leaders, George G, started a scholarship for um, high school high school seniors or other G's that are maintaining further education. And so Harry G, one of the leaders, Junior, had asked me if I would like to be on the scholarship committee. And so I, I, this was many years ago, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to participate. So I participated several years, and it's really we used to just give kind of small scholarships, but now that were just maybe $250. Now we're able to give $1,000, $2,500 scholarships to about usually to 15 deserving high school seniors or uh, people that are getting higher education. So it's and it's a time when we can give scholarships. It's a time to socialize, um, and we usually have these events like at a Chinese restaurant. There's usually something like 300 people that are there, and there's a lot of city council people. There's a lot of very high profile people that are there, and it's a wonderful place to mingle and socialize and just kind of renew friendships.
Yeah, sure. So how has that experience as a member on the scholarship committee shape your understanding of Houston's Asian community?
Um, when you're on the committee, uh, the the scholarship, the person that's trying out for the scholarship fills out a form, and yeah, there's a lot of need uh, in the in this area where where it's wonderful that uh, that the recipient can apply, and it's wonderful that there'll be about 15 scholarships that we be given out, and like I shared with you, there are 1,000, 2,000, $5,000 there to very people that definitely need the support.
Besides scholarship, are there any other like G family functions that are related to Houston community?
Um, there are that is for the G Family Association. They there are several different organizations, Chinese organizations that uh, help in the community. One is the Chinese American Citizens Alliance. They participate. Uh, they're an organization that they're like a spokes. They're kind of like a mouthpiece for the Chinese community at large. They I'm just trying to think of a situation where they are, uh, well, I'm not going to say they're political uh, activists, but if something occurs in the news that um, where, let's just say there's an Asian or a Chinese person that has been unjustly accused of something, then uh, they will uh, write and and make it known that they would like to see justice served.
Mm.
Um, I guess another organization is the offshoot of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance is that there's a Miss Chinatown Houston pageant that's an annual event, and I've had the joy and honor of photographing this event for many years now.
Mm. Interesting. I know there are other G families in other parts of the US. So how connected is the G family in Houston to other G families?
I've heard that it is right. There are, I think, in Houston, the G family is probably one of the largest groups that maintain an annual get together. They do interact. It's my understanding that every few years there's kind of like a national G um, convention of sorts.
Mm.
I remember many years ago, um, being a photographer, I was asked to go and I did photograph some of the some of the events and things, and then those photographs were published in their uh, newsletters.
Mm. I see. So from the standpoint of a member of a major Asian American family in Houston, in what ways do you think an organized large family group can play a role in representing the Asian Americans in a major metropolitan city in the US?
Um, I'm I think it's wonderful that there are um, Asians that are shaping uh, the community uh, in a very positive way. I want to do my small part and and participate in any way that I can. Uh, I sit on the board of the Better Business Bureau and have done that for the last maybe 3 or 4 years. And and I sit on the membership committee as the chair. Um, it's The Better Business Bureau does a lot of wonderful things in the community. They are um, they are a mediator between uh, business and the consumer. And whenever there's a disconnect, when the customer is not happy, um, they have the Better Business Bureau to be the intercessory uh, and uh, be that liaison between the two and I really believe in uh, that kind of mediation, so that there's not any ill will, and it gives the small business or the large business the opportunity uh, to work things out.
Mhm. I see. Yeah, Yeah, before closing our interviews, would you like to share any update about yourself or your business since our last interview, like on COVID experience?
Um, this is I'm very flattered that Anne had asked me to be a part of this. I think that having interviews like this, it gives from a historical perspective, kind of gives you a flavor of of what's going on, and it's impartial. You know, I wasn't given the questions early. Um, I just kind of answered the questions off the cuff, and I think I would be kind of like a typical uh, Chinese American that has grown up in this wonderful city. I think that Houston is the most wonderful place to live. If I had a place to choose, this would be the place that I would want to live because we live in a city there's a lot of diversity and everybody seems to kind of get along. You know, when there's you know, in some cities, when when the city wins the World Series, you know, they kind of get a little rowdy. That didn't happen here in Houston, you know, in 2017. It's a very respectful city. It's a great place to live and work and play.
Sure. So now if you're asking to leave a message for your later generations, what would you say to them?
Um, I would say do your best, invest in your community when you can, and and just have a great life.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think these are my questions. Do you have any further sharing for now?
Oh, I think you covered it, Kelly. I thank you very much for being such a wonderful interviewer.
Oh, thank you so much for taking your time again. And yeah, I enjoyed this interview so much. Thank
Good.
you.
Okay.